He was taught to be fair, to explain, to trust, to believe that in the end the truth prevails. But nobody told him one thing: the real world isn't a fair debate, it's a game of positioning. And if they want to destroy you, they won't do it by shouting. They'll do it by smiling, they'll do it by praising you, they'll do it by confusing you. Machiavelli already understood that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, is the only way to survive in environments where the end justifies the means. And here's the controversial part. Being good doesn't protect you. Being predictable exposes you. Perhaps the biggest mistake isn't trusting the wrong people, but playing by the wrong rules. Today you'll understand why better to be feared than loved was never about cruelty. It was about structural respect. And you'll learn how to become too expensive to manipulate without losing your essence. Because when you master your own reaction, nobody else can control you. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He's already noticed something curious. Those who play dirty don't look for the strongest, they look for the most predictable. And ironically, good people tend to be predictable. They believe in justice, consistency, and clear rules. But as Machiavelli taught, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, is what truly governs human games. When someone always acts with an appearance of virtue, without strategy, they become an open book. Those who play dirty read that book, mark the pages, and use it against you. Moral consistency becomes a tactical map for those who understand that the end justifies the means. They don't attack your goodness, they exploit it. And here's the uncomfortable point. Being good isn't the problem. Being predictably good is, because those who make decisions based on real human nature understand that many people don't play by the same code. And that's where the difference between naivete and strategy begins. Imagine someone at work who always agrees to help, always over-explains, always gives in. Seems virtuous, doesn't it? But a strategist perceives something beyond that, pattern, and pattern is vulnerability. Machiavelli spoke of virtù and fortuna, strategic virtue allied with luck, but no amount of luck protects those who don't practice constant adaptability. Those who insist only on avoiding being hated end up giving up being respected. And there's a brutal difference between being loved, being feared, and being irrelevant. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean brutality. It means controlled predictability. Good people usually react the same way. They explain, justify, forgive. For a dirty player, this is like facing an army without walls. And no real power can be sustained without its own loyal armies. A metaphor here for firm boundaries and clear positioning. He needs to understand one simple thing. The world is not a fair court. It's a chessboard. And on the chessboard, those who understand the calculated use of force rarely need to actually use it. Good people, when they don't study strategy, become pawns. Not because they are weak, but because they ignore the game. Machiavelli would never say to stop being good. He would say not to be naive. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires him to observe patterns silently. Those who play dirty don't respect morality, they respect consequences. And while he insists only on the appearance of virtue, the other is gathering information. And this opens up an uncomfortable question. What if the greatest strength isn't always being outwardly honest, but learning to control how much others know about you? He believes that strength is about demonstrating power all the time. But those who truly understand Machiavelli know that true mastery begins with concealment. The art of controlled weakness is not about being weak, it's about appearing harmless when convenient. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that not all capabilities should be displayed. Whoever reveals everything they know gives away the map to their own fortress, and a fortress without mystery is an invitation to siege. The strategist understands that the end justifies the means when the objective is strategic protection. He may know how to negotiate better, argue better, perceive patterns clearly, but he chooses not to show everything, because the calculated use of force includes knowing when not to use any force at all. Sometimes the best move is to let the other believe they are winning. Consider a negotiation. If one party demonstrates complete technical knowledge, the other immediately goes on the defensive. But if they ask simple, almost naive questions, they gather valuable information. It's as if they're saying, "Explain it to me better," while observing inconsistencies. This is virtù and fortuna in practice, strategic skill combined with the right timing. Those who practice constant adaptability don't react impulsively, they test the waters. And here's the secret few teach: when you appear too invulnerable, people shut down. When you show yourself to be human, they open up. Machiavelli knew that better to be feared than loved is about perception, not aggression. And sometimes appearing small today is the smartest way to grow tomorrow. He needs to understand that having his own loyal armies isn't just about external allies. It's about internal resources, silence, observation, patience. When someone deliberately reveals a weakness, like admitting a controlled doubt, the other tends to reveal much more. Those who play dirty thrive on information. So why give yours away? Decisions based on real human nature show that people underestimate those who seem less threatening. And this creates strategic space. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean exposing yourself completely. An appearance of virtue can be maintained while the mind works silently. Controlled weakness isn't submission, it's positioning. And those who learn to control what they reveal begin to understand something even more powerful. Perhaps the greatest advantage lies not in what you say, but in what you choose not to explain. He thinks that if he explains himself well, he will be understood, but he rarely realizes that by over-justifying himself, he transfers power. When someone demands constant explanations, they don't want clarity. They want control. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows that those who talk too much reveal vulnerabilities. Each justification opens a new front of attack. The end justifies the means, and the most effective means for a manipulator is to make you defend yourself, because whoever is defending themselves is already in an inferior position. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means that your posture needs to communicate firmness, not a need for approval. He begins to notice that every time he tries to over-explain his decisions, the other party finds a loophole to question him again. And so, the cycle never ends. Consider a simple situation. Someone questions your career choice, your investment, your change in routine. If you respond with a complete report, trying to prove rationality, you open the door to counter-arguments. But if you respond calmly, "It's the best decision for me," without hostility, you close the battleground. Calculated use of force includes knowing when not to enter the arena. Virtù and fortuna also mean knowing when silence is worth more than 1,000 arguments. Those who practice constant adaptability understand that not every attack deserves a response. Decisions based on real human nature show that many criticisms are tests of dominance, and those who react emotionally fail the test. He begins to realize that silence has no surface to be attacked. An appearance of virtue can be maintained without the need for constant self-defense. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean always pleasing. It means not exposing oneself unnecessarily. One's own loyal armies here are one's internal limits. Machiavelli would never advise constant confrontation. He would advise strategic positioning. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve personal authority, and authority is born from self-control. The less you explain, the more people need to interpret, and interpretation generates uncertainty, and uncertainty changes the game. Because whoever cannot predict your reaction begins to hesitate. And when the other hesitates, you begin to see something even more interesting. Perhaps the real attack never comes directly. Perhaps it comes in the form of silent positioning. He still believes that explaining solves everything. That if he is clear enough, honest enough, patient enough, the other person will understand. But Machiavelli already warned, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires observing how people actually use information. When he explains too much, he surrenders power. Each justification is another piece on the other person's chessboard. Those who play dirty don't want to understand, they want material. The end justifies the means. For them, meaning using your own words against you. And here's the invisible trick. When you explain yourself, you accept the other person's judgment as legitimate. You enter the arena they built, and whoever defines the arena already starts with an advantage. Better to be feared than loved sometimes is simply not justifying yourself. Consider a typical argument. He explains why he was late, why he decided something, why he changed his mind. He believes he's being transparent. But someone with manipulative intentions uses every detail to tighten the screws. Decisions based on real human nature show that the more you talk, the more loopholes appear. Not because you're wrong, but because no explanation is perfect. There will always be something to distort. The appearance of virtue becomes a trap when you feel a constant need to prove you're right. And that's when the wear and tear begins. Avoiding being hated becomes an obsession. But real power doesn't come from constant approval. It comes from silent security. And silence, unlike explanation, offers no surface for attack. He needs to understand that the calculated use of force includes the calculated use of silence. His own loyal armies, in this context, represent his posture and his limits. When you only answer what is necessary, you create uncertainty in the other person. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for the manipulator. Virtù and fortuna appear when you choose the exact moment to speak and when not to speak. Constant adaptability means perceiving when a conversation has ceased to be a search for understanding and has become an attempt at control. Machiavelli would never say to lie gratuitously, but he would say not to expose oneself unnecessarily. Because in the human game, those who try to win through excessive explanation usually lose energy and authority. And this leads to an even deeper question. What if the dirty players don't even need to attack, because they have already created the perfect scenario for you to harm yourself? He imagines that conflict always begins with a direct attack. But anyone who truly understands Machiavelli knows that the most dangerous games begin before the first word. Dirty players don't attack. They position themselves. They create circumstances where any move you make seems wrong. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the scenario is more important than the confrontation. The end justifies the means when the goal is to put you in an elegant trap. They don't need to shout, threaten, or accuse. They simply arrange the pieces. And when you realize it, you're responding within a framework you didn't design. Better to be feared than loved in this context is about not appearing easily displaceable. Because whoever can be easily moved becomes a piece, not a player. Consider corporate environments. Someone doesn't confront you directly, but begins to subtly plant doubts about your decision. They ask public questions with an innocent tone. They put you in a position to explain yourself to others. This isn't an attack, it's strategic positioning. Virtù and fortuna appear when you understand the game before reacting. Calculated use of force here can simply mean not engaging in provocation. Constant adaptability means realizing that the battle isn't about content, but about framing. Decisions based on real human nature show that social pressure is often used as an invisible weapon, and those who don't realize this respond emotionally, strengthening the scenario set up against them. He needs to learn to ask, who is setting the rules of this conversation? Because having your own loyal armies isn't just about being an ally, it's also about your reputation and public standing. An appearance of virtue can be used against you if exploited as a weakness. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean accepting any framing. Machiavelli would say that true strength lies in redefining the board. Sometimes the strategic response is to change the context of the conversation. Sometimes it's to postpone. Sometimes it's to shift the focus. The end justifies the means when the goal is to get out of the minefield before stepping on the bomb. And when he begins to see the hidden positioning, he starts to realize something even more uncomfortable. Perhaps the concept of justice, which he values so much, doesn't work as he imagines in this kind of game. He grew up believing that being fair solves everything, that if you act correctly, the other person will be obliged to do the same. But Machiavelli would never bet everything on that. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires recognizing that not everyone plays by the same rules. Justice only works when both sides respect the invisible agreement. When one side decides that the end justifies the means, the balance is no longer even. And those who insist only on the appearance of virtue can become easy targets. It is better to be feared than loved sometimes, to understand that kindness without strategy becomes weakness. Not because justice is wrong, but because it is not universally practiced. Imagine someone who always tries to resolve conflicts maturely. They explain, negotiate, and compromise a little. It seems right, doesn't it? But those who play dirty interpret this as predictability. Decisions based on real human nature show that some people see concession as weakness, and they begin to test limits. Calculated use of force doesn't mean aggression. It means establishing consequences. Avoiding being hated cannot be a higher priority than preserving respect. Virtù and fortuna appear when you know when to stop negotiating. Constant adaptability requires recognizing the moment when justice ceases to be a solution and becomes an emotional trap. He begins to understand that having his own loyal armies is also about applying his principles firmly, not just declaring them. Strategic justice is different from moral naivete. Machiavelli did not despise virtue, but he knew it needed to be accompanied by structural strength. Because when the other perceives that there are no consequences, he advances. And when he advances without resistance, he creates psychological dominance. The end justifies the means when the objective is to preserve autonomy. And autonomy is not maintained with good intentions alone. Sometimes maintaining your position requires not appearing overly available. And this opens up a subtle question. What if your immediate reaction is exactly what the other expects to continue the game? He feels that internal pressure to respond immediately. Message received, immediate response. Provocation made, instant reaction. But Machiavelli understood something essential. Whoever controls time controls the game. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows that urgency is often a tool of manipulation. The end justifies the means for those who want to throw you off balance emotionally. And the simplest way to do this is to create a sense of immediacy. When he responds too quickly, he reveals his emotional state. Better to be feared than loved, in this case, is not to appear available all the time, because constant availability reduces strategic value. Consider a common situation. Someone sends a provocative criticism, expecting an impulsive reaction. If they respond immediately, it confirms the expectation. But if they wait a few hours, or even a day, something interesting happens. The tension shifts. Calculated use of force can simply be the calculated use of time. Decisions based on real human nature show that uncertainty generates discomfort in the manipulator. Virtù and fortuna appear when they understand that temporary silence is not weakness, it's positioning. Constant adaptability means choosing the pace, not following the imposed pace. And often, the absence of a response speaks louder than any argument. One's own loyal armies here are self-control and patience. An appearance of virtue can be maintained without emotional submission. Avoiding being hated doesn't require always being accessible. Machiavelli taught that real power isn't about shouting, it's about knowing how to wait. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve inner control. When he stops reacting immediately, he begins to observe more. And when he observes more, he notices patterns. And when he notices patterns, he begins to understand something even deeper. Perhaps the most effective attack against him isn't external. Perhaps it's the constant attempt to tamper with his own identity. He begins to notice that the attacks aren't always about facts. Often they're about who he is. Subtle comments, labels disguised as opinions, small distortions of his personality. Machiavelli already understood that politics guided by reality, not ideals, involves understanding that identity is power. If someone can make you doubt yourself, they've already gained ground. The end justifies the means for those who want to weaken your center. Better to be feared than loved, here, means being too stable to be redefined by others. Because when you begin to hesitate about who you are, you begin to hesitate about what you decide, and hesitant decision is strategic vulnerability. Imagine a situation where someone says, "You always exaggerate," or "You can't handle pressure." If he internalizes this without filtering it, he begins to act defensively. Decisions based on real human nature show that repetition shapes perception, and perception shapes behavior. Calculated use of force, in this case, means not accepting imposed labels. Virtù and fortuna appear when he calmly responds, "That's your interpretation, not my reality." Constant adaptability doesn't mean changing essence, but adjusting strategy. The appearance of virtue can be maintained as long as the internal identity remains solid, and this creates a powerful contrast. Whoever tries to destabilize realizes they haven't found an opening. Your own loyal armies here are your well-defined internal values. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean molding your identity to please others. Machiavelli would teach that whoever controls the narrative controls perception, and perception, in the human game, is almost everything. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve your mental autonomy. If you know who you are, external comments lose their power. But if you depend on constant validation, any criticism becomes an earthquake. And when identity is shaken, decisions become confused. And when decisions become confused, manipulators thrive. And this leads us to something even more interesting. What if the best defense isn't just firmness, but strategic unpredictability? He always heard that consistency is an absolute virtue. And it is, to a certain extent. But Machiavelli understood something few admit. Excessive predictability is an invitation to manipulation. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that whoever can map its patterns can anticipate its movements, and whoever anticipates its movements controls the game. The end justifies the means when the objective is to preserve strategic freedom. Better to be feared than loved sometimes is simply not being easily deciphered. This doesn't mean acting without principles. It means not revealing your entire pattern of reaction, because a fixed pattern is vulnerability. Imagine someone who always responds immediately, always accepts requests, always reacts with the same tone. Therefore, everyone knows how to activate them. Decisions based on real human nature show that people build mental maps about you, and they begin to exploit this. Calculated use of force can include changing the pace, changing the timing, changing the intensity. Virtù and fortuna appear when you break expectations at the right moment. Constant adaptability is precisely about not being a prisoner of your own pattern. The appearance of virtue can remain intact while your strategy varies, and this variation generates a powerful psychological effect: uncertainty. Your own loyal armies, in this case, are your internal capabilities intelligently guarded. Avoiding being hated doesn't require being predictable. Machiavelli would never advise unnecessary chaos, but rather strategic flexibility. The end justifies the means when the goal is to prevent the other from drawing their own map. When someone becomes slightly unpredictable, responding at different times, accepting some things and denying others, sometimes observing before reacting, something changes. Whoever tried to manipulate them loses their bearings, and when someone loses their bearings, they lose confidence in their own plan. And when the other's plan begins to fail, something even more impactful emerges: the discomfort generated by their absence. He may not realize it, but his constant presence fuels certain games. Those who depend on his reaction need him to always be there. Machiavelli understood that politics guided by reality, not ideals, involves knowing when to withdraw energy. The end justifies the means when the goal is to break cycles of manipulation. Better to be feared than loved, in this case, is simply to be less available, because availability creates predictability, and predictability creates comfort for those who want to control. When he begins to reduce access, emotional, verbal, digital, something changes in the dynamic. There is no confrontation, there is no attack, only strategic absence. Consider a simple situation. Someone provokes you, expecting a response. They don't respond, or they respond neutrally and briefly. Then they reduce contact. A calculated use of force can mean withdrawing your presence. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who manipulate need constant stimulation. When they don't receive it, they begin to feel insecure. Virtù and fortuna appear when the timing of the withdrawal is correct. Constant adaptability means knowing that not every problem is solved with argumentation. An appearance of virtue can remain intact while you simply withdraw from the other person's game. And this generates a curious phenomenon. The person who previously seemed dominant begins to seek you out. Your own loyal armies here are your self-esteem and self-control. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean remaining accessible to those who wear you down. Machiavelli would say that real power is a choice, not a necessity. The end justifies the means when the goal is to become too expensive to manipulate. When he strategically distances himself, he sends a silent message: my attention is not free, and attention is emotional currency. Whoever loses access begins to feel a loss of influence, and loss of influence generates fear. But here emerges the final and most sophisticated layer of the game. Perhaps the goal was never to dominate anyone. Perhaps it's something even higher, more internal, more silent. He spent his life believing he needed to defeat people. to conquer, dominate, prove superiority. But Machiavelli saw something more sophisticated. True power lies not in direct confrontation. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the cleanest victory is one that doesn't even seem like a battle. The end justifies the means when the objective is to preserve autonomy, not to humiliate the other. Better to be feared than loved was never about brutality. It was about structural respect. And respect is born when you become too valuable to manipulate, not because you shout, not because you threaten, but because you are not easy to move, because your identity is firm, because your reaction is controlled, because your presence is not gratuitous. Decisions based on real human nature reveal something simple. Manipulators seek targets that offer cheap emotional returns. Those who react impulsively, who over-explain, who try to be fair at any cost, become a lucrative investment for those who play dirty. Calculated use of force here is self-control. Virtù and fortuna appear when you understand that external dominance begins with internal dominance. Constant adaptability means adjusting posture without losing essence. The appearance of virtue can be maintained without naivete. Your own loyal armies are your principles allied to your strategy. And when these elements align, something changes in external perception. People feel that there are consequences, even if you don't need to demonstrate them. Avoiding hatred doesn't mean seeking approval. It means acting with enough emotional intelligence not to create unnecessary enemies, but also not accepting silent manipulation. Machiavelli would never preach constant conflict. He would teach positioning. The end justifies the means when the means is self-control. And self-control is the highest form of power, because he who cannot be provoked cannot be led. He who cannot be led cannot be manipulated. And when he understands this, he realizes he doesn't need to dominate anyone. He only needs to become too difficult to play with. And perhaps now that he sees the whole board, he is ready to respond in a way that few imagine. Now he knows. It's not about winning arguments. It's not about humiliating opponents, and much less about becoming cold or cruel. It's about ceasing to be predictable, about ceasing to react as expected, about ceasing to give away emotional control for free. Machiavelli never taught gratuitous malice. He taught lucidity. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, is about seeing the game before moving the piece. The end justifies the means when the means is self-control. And self-control is freedom. The question now is simple and uncomfortable. How many times have you reacted exactly as expected? How many times have you tried to avoid being hated and ended up being disrespected? How many times have you confused the appearance of virtue with real strength? Better to be feared than loved has never meant spreading fear. It means being structurally firm. It means that your decisions based on real human nature don't depend on anyone's approval. Calculated use of force is knowing when to act and when to simply observe. Constant adaptability is understanding that the game changes and you change along with it, but without losing your center. Now tell me, are you going to continue playing as a pawn, or are you going to take control of the board? Are you going to continue explaining everything? Or are you going to start choosing what to reveal? Are you going to continue reacting impulsively? Or are you going to turn time into an ally? Your own loyal armies begin within you. Your boundaries, your posture, your identity. If this content has opened your eyes, then don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and continue learning how to apply strategy, emotional intelligence, and real positioning in your life. Because knowledge without application is just theory. And you already understand that theory alone doesn't win any game.